Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex or Nuzz here, and today's video is going to be episode 2 of the Poor versus Rich series. Now, if you don't know, this series is all about comparing gear setups for a certain boss and seeing if you really need high-level gear to do PvM, and we also look at how much expensive gear actually affects PvM in terms of kill speed, profit, and cost. Now, this episode is going to be about Raksha. Now, Raksha is a boss that is considered high-level, but I actually know many people who don't have a lot of PvM skill that practice Raksha a lot and then end up getting really good at it. So I'm really excited for this episode because we are going to see how much better an expensive setup really is compared to a budget setup for a boss that is not time gated, which means the more damage you do at Raksha, the faster your kill speeds will be, and there will be no downtime unlike a Raksor. So if you're enjoying this series, make sure to subscribe. Like 85% of you aren't subscribed, so if you can, hit that subscribe button so you can keep up with all the future videos. And make sure to hit the like button if you are excited for this video, as it helps get the video out to more people, and it really does help a ton in terms of my views and everything like that. And make sure to drop a comment below telling me what boss you want to see in the next episode. But first, let's get right into the Raksha gear setups. So first we're going to take a look at the high level setup. Now this setup is my personal Raksha setup that I've used for over 1,000 kills. Now keep in mind I don't have the absolute best in slot range gear by any means, but it is a very expensive setup and it gets the job done quite well. So basically we have full Serenic with best in slot perks including Biting 4 and stuff like that. We have dual wield ascensions. We have Essence of Finality with a Dark Bow in it. We have Nightmare Gauntlets, Fleeting Boots, the Reaver's Ring. We have a Saren Godbow as my special attack weapon. We have a Scythe and Laceration Boots for clearing the Raksha pools. We have a Flanking Switch, a Planted Feet Switch on Glaives. We've got Elder Overloads, Spiritual Prayers for my Ripper Demon, and much more. Now, as for the cost, we will be using the Greater Ricochet ability, which costs a whopping 1.6 billion GP. We will also be using Tier 99 Range Prayer, which is another 775 mil. And then my total price for the armors, weapons, and perks comes out to around 3.8 billion GP for a total setup cost of around 6 billion GP. So quite expensive to say the least. So now that we've done the high level setup, let's see how the budget setup that I made compares. So if we look at our budget setup, we have a Pernix top, bottom, and cowl. Now you could, however, use Serenic, but it'll cost you more in money per hour. And I know a lot of people have told me in the comments that Elite Robin Hood is good. However, the Golden Thread wouldn't actually buy on the GE for me, and Elite Robin Hood actually becomes untradeable. So I didn't want to buy it, seeing as I mainly use Serenic, so that's the reason I chose Pernix. Now Ascension hand grips and the Stalker's Ring are decent budget options for those slots. We have the Wyvern Crossbow, which is the engine to this build, and by far the most expensive part. The Farsight Sniper Necklace, which is essentially free, an Armadyl Book, and as for the inventory, we have a similar inventory to the high level setup, except instead of the Scythe, we are going to be using Lanikia's Spear to clear the pools. And then we actually do have more food because we are definitely going to need it with such a budget setup, but I am going to attempt this with a Ripper Demon. I am also using Dragonstone Criminal Bolts as a switch instead of Hydrix Bolts, seeing as Hydrix Bolts are much more expensive. So in total, we're looking at around 235 mil cost for the budget build, so almost like 25 to 30 times cheaper than the high level build. So now I'm going to talk about my experience at Raksha with these two setups, and then I'll get into some more statistical and analytical comparisons. So for the high level setup, things went as they normally would. Kills were smooth, I could soul split a ton of health off greater ricochet, my Saren Godbow was hitting hard, and the kills were relatively smooth with barely any food used. I do have the luxury of doing so much Raksha with this setup that I'm really used to it, but honestly you don't even need an Eldritch Crossbow or like a 15 bill max range setup to get good kill times, as me using Ascensions and SGB, I am able to get around 3-minute and 30-second kills on average, sometimes if I slack near the 3:45 to 4-minute mark, but usually always less than 4 minutes. Now moving on to the budget setup, well this is where things get really interesting. I didn't have Nightmare Gauntlets, so Snipe was not as good, and I couldn't use it while moving, which you move a lot at Raksha. I also didn't have the huge damage boost that greater ricochet brings. My SGB spec I didn't have as well, but the most glaring part that I was desperately missing, I felt like, was the essence of finality. Having the extra soul split heals from the EOF was really nice with the high level setup, and the depot spec is really underrated. What would happen was I would find myself a lot of the time being very high adrenaline, even after using Death Swiftness, Rapid Fire, Tendrils, and Snapshot. I would just run out of damaging thresholds and really just have too much adrenaline, when usually I would be able to use my Essence of Finality and use the depot spec and get a huge damage boost and use up some of my extra adren. With this budget setup, I was stuck using low damaging basics or thresholds until my good thresholds were off cooldown or I could use Death Swiftness. This was by far the thing that I missed the most, and I think adding an Essence of Finality to this budget setup would have made it double in price, but also it would have made the kills a lot smoother. So another struggle I had was food. I was just eating a ton. I didn't heal as much without Soul Split, and I also dealt much lower damage, so I had to take more and more hits from Raksha and deal with more special attacks. This made it so my Raksha and Rage increased during the last phase, and Raksha's auto attacks were hitting hard through prayer. I did end up getting kills after a bit of practice, and my kill speeds were around 6 minutes, 30 seconds to 7 minutes, which is almost double the kill speed of the high level setup. So now we're going to look at a side-by-side comparison of some of Raksha's phases. Now the first thing I want to show is the absolute first phase of Raksha, right when you start the fight. Now the thing about this phase is, using my high level setup, I would usually phase Raksha before Raksha was able to use their stun and drop their magic ball on me. Then I would go right into phase 2, but with the budget setup, this was not the case at all. I was nowhere near close to phasing Raksha before the magic stun attack, and I would have to freedom, dodge the magic ball, and continue trying to deal DPS while watching out for more special attacks before phasing into phase 2. Another big thing I noticed was the last phase of Raksha, which was something like Raksha's blue shield. Now Raksha will put up a blue shield and you have to deal a certain amount of damage to break it, and then you can move on. Well, with my high level setup, my enrage was much lower because I got through the fights faster and killed all the pools easier, and that means the shield would have lower health and it would be easy to kill in a threshold or two. But as for my budget build, I had to actually go and hide around the pillars while dealing no damage and just wait for the shield to disappear, because I was not capable of dishing out enough damage before I get insta-killed. Now these were the main two things I noticed, but another was food usage. I basically used all my food using the budget setup. I would have to resonance things, devo, use more defensives, and I wasn't able to soul split back as much health. Now this is going to factor in later to supply usage, but I did notice it a lot when killing with the budget setup. So now we're going to move on to the statistics and some interesting info and comparisons I found. So first we're going to look at the death cost comparisons. Now neither of these setups use the Ring of Death, and I like to use a Reaver's Ring for the high level setup for more DPS, and the budget setup, it was too expensive to fit in with our current budget. For the budget setup, we have a death cost of around 1 million GP, which is pretty average using Protect Item. Now as for the high level setup, using Protect Item, we see a big increase at around 3.1 million GP in death costs. Now this means we are going to be punished more for dying with our high level setup. But in all honesty, I felt like I was way more likely to die with my low level setup than I was with the high level setup. which those facts would lead me to come to the conclusion that even though the death costs are 3 times as much, I think it's still worth it to use the high level setup over the budget, and you could always just swap the Reaver's Ring out for the Ring of Death to easily negate the cost, but I definitely found myself dying a lot less with the high level setup. I almost never die using the high level setup that I usually use, but I did die a lot trying to get kills with the budget setup in this video. So now we're going to look at the supply cost of each setup. Now this is estimated, so it may not be 100% accurate, but it is my best guess. So for the budget setup, we have much lower costs in terms of bolts, essence of finality charges, and things like that. We're looking at 4.7 mil per hour. However, seeing as I eat a ton of food and brews every kill, the food cost actually makes up the majority of this hourly cost at 3 mil an hour in just food and brews. However, if you're using like the Armadillo book or a scrimshell that you paid for, it might go up to around 5.7 to 6 mil GP per hour. Now, as for the high level setup, we have around 8 to 10 mil an hour, which is mostly made up of a few things. I barely use any food using the high level setup, so the majority of our cost isn't actually from food, it's from spiritual prayer potions being chugged, as I didn't actually chug them using the lower level setup. Hydrix with criminal bolts is a huge part of it. Essence of finality charges add up and things like that. So we are looking at about a double supply cost per hour compared to each setup, but does it really matter? And my answer is no. It really doesn't matter if the high level setup even costs 15 mil an hour or 20 mil an hour. It would still be insanely worth it to use over the budget. And I'm about to show you why. So to show you why, I first have to show you the average Raksha price per kill, judging by the Runescape wiki statistics. Now the wiki accounts for the long-term drop rates, so this is what your average GP per kill will be in the long term of killing Raksha. You may not get this GP during your first 100 kills, but in the long term, over thousands of kills, this is what you should expect every single kill, and it is 4.7 million GP in loot per Raksha kill, which of course is heavily influenced by the price and drop rate of the Greater Ricochet Codex. So what does this mean? Well, let's look at some calculations. So with the budget setup, you are getting 9 kills per hour. Now, before anyone yells at me, this doesn't include banking, so keep that in mind. I didn't want to include banking because some people bank faster than others, so we're just going to go without any banking at all, but you can lower these stats by a little bit to account for bank time. So to do some math, we did 9 kills per hour, and we multiplied that by the price of each Raksha kill. Then we subtract 5 mil for around the average cost of supplies. That means we come out with 37 million GP per hour killing Raksha at 6-minute 30-second kills with the budget setup. I mean, that sounds pretty good, right? I was actually surprised with this. But if we move over to the high level setup, we get around 3-minute and 30-second kills for a total of 17 kills per hour. Now, if we do the same calculation for this one and then subtract our supply cost of 8 mil an hour, we are getting 72 million GP per hour, or almost double the profit per hour than the budget setup. Now, why does this matter? Well, I get comments a lot of the time that people say when I'm doing high level PVM or different PVM, why are you using Essence of Finality? Why are you using a Ripper Demon? Why are you using Hydrix Bullets? They're so expensive. I don't think it's worth it. You're probably losing money. You'd make more money just using less supplies and killing the boss slower. Well, looking at the math, at least for Raksha, this is just untrue. Sure, I may spend 8 mil, maybe even 10 mil an hour at Raksha using my high level setup, but the amount of kills that this allows me to get per hour dramatically increases my profit and it makes the money I spend on supplies 1,000% worth it. I could easily spend 30 million GPU per hour in supplies and still make more money per hour than the budget set up in the long run. However, of course, this does depend on the boss, which is the whole point of the series. For something like a Raksha, using Hydrix bolts and Essence of Finality may not speed up your kills as much as it did here at Raksha, so it's all relative. There also may be a sweet spot, for instance, maybe a mid-tier setup costing around 1 bill, spending like 6 mil an hour on supplies and stuff. Maybe that would be the sweet spot to make the most money per hour. That's a different topic, but in general, the extra costs should be worth it at most high-level bosses, and we can especially see that with these statistics at Raksha. So what is our verdict for budget Raksha? Well, I think it's honestly worth trying and doing with a budget setup. Raksha makes a ton of money, and even getting 7-minute kills, you can still make upwards of 35 mil an hour in the long run, which is super surprising to me and really good. I thought you might be losing money using a budget setup, but I was very wrong. However, I do suggest upgrading to something like the Essence of Finality before you start doing Raksha, because I think that single-handedly, that item is going to make such a huge difference on your kills. Now, let me know if you guys enjoyed this video and comparisons. I tried to use a lot of suggestions from last video's comments. You guys made awesome suggestions, and I really wanted to make these videos more interesting with more facts and stuff like that. So let me know below which boss you want to see me do next, and make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can see all the future episodes. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.